Acts
Acts,
27.
Acts 27, verse 13. Um, when a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought that they could make it. So they pulled up anchor and sailed close to the shore of Crete. But the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength, called a northern eastern, burst across the island and blew us out to sea. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind, and they gave up. So they gave up and let it run before the gale. We sailed along the sheltered side of a small island named Cauda, where with great difficulty we hoisted aboard the lifeboat being towed behind us. Then the sailors bound ropes around the hull of the ship to strengthen it. They were afraid of being driven across to the sandbars of Syrtis off the African coast. So they lowered the sea anchor to slow the ship and were driven before the wind. The next day, as gale force winds continued to batter the ship, the crew began throwing the cargo overboard. The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and threw it overboard. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars until at last all hope was gone. No one had eaten for a long time. Finally, Paul called the crew together and said, "Men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not Crete. You would have avoided all this damage and loss. But take courage, none of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. For last night, an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you, so take courage, for I believe it will be just as he said, but we will be shipwrecked on an island.'" I see that I see here an example of, Paul tells them here to, you should have done what I told you. Oh, you shouldn't have gone that direction. And but they didn't, and because of that, they ended up in a huge amount of difficulty and having to face the consequences of their actions. Like God is constantly telling us, don't do this and don't do that, and we have to face the consequences of our actions when we do disobey what he says, regardless of his mercy. And it's nice to see that he tells us right there, and that you see that example of mercy and of grace right there in verse 22. But take courage, none of you will lose your lives. Because they could have lost their lives in that boat. They could have been stranded out there. They could have all the ship could have gone down with them. But instead, God blessed them with confirmation. God blessed Paul with confirmation that safety was granted to them, and that they were going to be okay. I think we got to make sure to obey before, instead of facing the consequences, obey. Then you don't have to deal with the difficulties. Yeah.
Well, the things here, I saw that Paul was shipwrecked. I know that this is the consequences of these men. He warned them, and then they still decided to go on. So now they're shipwrecked. But Paul is shipwrecked too. Paul is in the middle of the sea. Paul is going to get drifted to an island. And some people would think, oh, the devil did this to him. The devil's attacking him. But not one mention of the devil here, do we read? So things happen to us in life, but how do we handle it? Here we see Paul, whose confidence is in the Lord.
Yeah.
And so when we're faced with trials, we crash or we lose our job or something happens to us, how do we deal with it? Do we go to the Lord? Do we consult with the Lord? Do we find rest in the Lord? Or do we blame the devil for what happened? I lost my job, so the devil's attacking me. There's no mention of the devil here. So all I'm saying here is that things happen to us in life, and the Lord is our rest. The Lord is our shield. The Lord is our comfort. The Lord is our strength. And that's what I see from Paul. And yet the people are going to see that from him, and they're going to follow him because he's not freaking out. He's not going to, he's not going to stress out. He's not going to, panic like they do. He's going to be totally different. And that's what holiness is, being set apart. You're so different than the world. And Paul was so different than they were.
Yeah. No, it says in Romans 7 that it is the sin living in me that causes that it's the sin living in us that is that our battle is against.
Well, one that I see is we should seek the Lord first. The centurion didn't listen to Paul, and Paul told him what God said, but he didn't follow the advice, or he didn't consult the Lord either. So that's the key there, is before we go doing things, major, even small things, we should seek the Lord or godly counsel. So they all went on based on what the what does it say? Advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. So he said it was okay. Although Paul was talking to the Lord and said it wasn't. So who are you going to listen to? So,
and we see that with young couples, so they start to date. Someone's not a believer, and then they get counsel from someone saying, "Hey, you shouldn't be unequally yoked." Yeah, and do they listen? Sometimes they don't, and then they suffer the consequences for that. And then why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? Well, the Lord told you not to do it, but you chose to do that anyway.
In verse 10, you see Paul say, "Men, I believe there's trouble ahead if we go on. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well." But they listen more to the ship's captain than to the owner, than to Paul. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We listen to our flesh instead and what we want.
Yeah, that happened to Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to listen to the Lord. He ended up almost killing a whole crew of ship on a ship, and then spent a few days in a whale, not doing what God told him to do.
He was trying to hide.
Yeah.
God knew where he was.
I can imagine some of the things that God had told me to go and do. If I hadn't done them, it'd be a different situation. Certainly wouldn't be here right now.